The Voldran Empire's prison station floated in the cold emptiness of space like a scar on the universe itself. It was built from dark metal that seemed to swallow light, and inside its walls, hope went to die. The station had earned its reputation across a dozen star systems as a place where mercy didn't exist. In the deepest level of this nightmare, in a pit carved from solid rock, the Voldran kept something they were proud of. They called it the Ravik. Captain Michael Hayes had heard the stories. Every spacer in the outer colonies knew about the Ravik. It was supposed to be a legend, a scary tale told to keep people in line. But now, standing in heavy chains that cut into his wrists, Michael knew the stories were all true. And he was about to watch his little girl become part of those stories. The observation deck was packed with prisoners. The Voldran always made sure everyone watched when they fed someone to the Ravik. It was their favorite way to break people's spirits. Michael could see his crew from the colony ship New Dawn scattered among the crowd. Some were crying. Others had their eyes closed, unable to watch what was about to happen. But Michael couldn't look away. Not from Grace. She was only 7 years old. Her brown hair was messy from 3 weeks of captivity, and her clothes were dirty and torn. But she still clutched that old stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. Her mother had made it for her before the illness took her. That rabbit was all Grace had left of her mom, and she held it tight against her chest like it could protect her from what was coming. The Voldran guards were tall creatures at least 8 feet high, with bodies covered in thick gray skin. Their faces looked like insects with mandibles that clicked when they talked. 2 of them dragged Grace toward the platform. She wasn't fighting anymore. She'd learned that fighting only made them rougher. Her blue eyes found her father in the crowd and she tried to smile. Tried to be brave. Please? Michael's voice cracked as he screamed. He threw himself against the chains so hard that blood ran down his arms. Take me instead. I'm the captain. I'm the one who fought you. She's just a child. She's innocent. The Voldran commander stepped forward. He was bigger than the others, with scars across his face that proved he'd survived many battles. When he clicked his mandibles together, it almost sounded like laughter. That is precisely why we chose her, human. We have studied your kind. You claim to be brave explorers, but you are weak. Your attachment to your young makes you soft. Every other species in this galaxy knows that offspring must earn their place. But you humans protect them, love them, even when they cannot contribute. It is pathetic. He leaned closer to Michael, his breath smelling like rotting meat. Let this be a lesson to all who defy the Voldran Empire. Your weakness will be your end. Michael felt his heart breaking as they placed Grace on the metal platform. It was a lift that would lower her down into the pit below. Into the darkness where the Ravik waited. The other prisoners from New Dawn began to shout and cry out, but the guards beat them back with shock sticks that crackled with electricity. Grace looked up one more time. Her lips moved, and even though Michael couldn't hear her over the noise, he could read her lips. I love you, Daddy. Then the platform began to descend. The pit was at least 50 feet deep. As Grace went down, the light from above grew dimmer and dimmer. The walls were covered in deep scratches, claw marks from the Ravik trying to escape over the years. At the bottom, bones were scattered across the floor. The remains of previous victims. Grace saw them and squeezed her rabbit tighter. The darkness down there was almost complete. Grace's eyes slowly adjusted, but she wished they hadn't. Because that's when she saw it move. The Ravik emerged from the shadows like a nightmare coming to life. It was bigger than anything Grace had ever imagined. 25 feet long from nose to tail, with a body built like it was designed for killing. Its scales were the color of midnight, so dark they seemed to absorb what little light reached the pit. Sharp spines ran along its back, each one as long as Grace's arm. When it opened its mouth, she could see rows of curved teeth that looked like daggers made of bone. But it was the eyes that froze her in place. They glowed amber like fire burning behind glass. Those eyes locked onto Grace and the creature began moving toward her. Its claws scraped against the stone floor, making a sound that echoed through the pit. Above, Michael was screaming until his throat was raw. The other prisoners were shouting and crying. The Voldran guards were leaning over the edge, eager to see the kill they'd watched so many times before. Grace knew she should run, but there was nowhere to go. The pit walls were smooth and impossible to climb. She was trapped down here with this monster. Her mind raced, searching for anything that might help, any memory of her parents that could save her now. Then she remembered something her mother used to say. When you're scared, Grace, sing our song. It always makes things better. So Grace did the only thing she could think of. Standing there in that pit of death, with a monster approaching and her father screaming above, she began to sing. It was the bedtime song her mother used to sing every night before she got sick. Grace's voice was small and shaky, barely a whisper in that vast dark space. The words trembled as they left her mouth, mixing with her tears. The Ravik stopped. Its massive head tilted to one side like it was confused. Those burning amber eyes blinked once, then twice. The creature stood perfectly still, just 15 feet away from Grace, listening to a little girl sing a lullaby in the place where so many had died screaming. Up in the observation deck, the Voldrin guards stopped their celebrating. Their mandibles clicked in confusion as they stared down into the pit. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Ravik had never hesitated before. For 8 years, it had torn apart every living thing they threw into that pit within seconds. Prisoners, captured soldiers, even large animals from other worlds. Nothing survived more than a few moments. But now it just stood there, completely still, watching this small human child. The massive creature lowered its head slowly toward Grace. She could feel the heat coming off its body, could smell something like hot metal and earth. Its nostrils flared wide as it breathed in her scent, trying to understand what she was. Grace's whole body was shaking so badly she thought her legs might give out. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to scream, to do something. But she remembered her father's words from when she was even smaller, when she was afraid of the dark on their ship. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Grace, he told her. It means you do what's right even when you're terrified. So Grace did something that made every prisoner watching gasp in horror. She reached out her tiny hand, fingers trembling, and placed it on the Ravik's snout. The scales felt warm and smooth, like sun-heated stone. She could feel the creature's breath washing over her in hot waves. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm scared too." For a long moment nothing happened. Grace stood there with her hand on the monster's face, feeling its breath, seeing her reflection in those glowing amber eyes. Then the Ravik made a sound that shook the entire chamber. But it wasn't a roar. It wasn't the sound of a predator about to kill. It was something else entirely. Something soft and sad and almost gentle. The sound reminded Grace of when her mother used to cry at night after the doctors gave her the bad news. The creature nudged Grace gently with its massive head, so carefully that it barely moved her. Then, while everyone watched in stunned silence, the Ravik curled its enormous body around the little girl. Its long tail wrapped around her in a protective circle, and one of its wings extended over her like a shield. Grace found herself in a warm, dark space that smelled strange but somehow didn't feel dangerous anymore. "What is happening?" The Voldrin commander's voice cracked with anger and confusion. "This is impossible. Use the shock prods. Get down there and separate them now." 4 guards grabbed long poles with crackling electric ends and descended into the pit on cables. Their boots hit the ground with heavy thuds, and they approached the Ravik cautiously. The creature's eyes tracked their movement, and a low rumble built in its chest. "Move away from the human," one guard commanded, jabbing the shock prod forward. That's when everything changed. The Ravik exploded into motion, but not toward Grace. It became a whirlwind of claws and teeth and fury, striking at the guards with terrifying speed. But here's what made Captain Michael Hayes' breath catch in his throat. The creature never once moved Grace. Even as it fought, it kept the little girl safely tucked beneath its wing, protected from the violence happening just feet away. It was fighting with only half its body, using the other half as a living shield for a child it had just met. The guards scrambled back, shouting in their clicking language, and were quickly pulled back up on their cables. One had deep scratches across his armor. Another had dropped his shock prod, and it lay sparking on the pit floor. Michael pressed against the observation window, hardly believing what he was seeing. Grace had crawled out from under the Ravik's wing and was sitting cross-legged against the creature's massive side. She was still humming that bedtime song, her small voice floating up from the darkness. The Ravik had positioned itself between her and the entrance to the pit, its head moving back and forth, watching for any new threat. The Voldrin commander was pacing now, his claws clicking angrily on the metal floor. "This is unacceptable. The human child has corrupted our weapon somehow. We will starve them both. The Ravik will eat the girl when it gets hungry enough." But he was wrong. Over the next 3 days the prison staff tried everything they could think of. They stopped lowering food into the pit, thinking hunger would drive the Ravik to attack. Instead, when Grace's small meal ration was lowered down on the second day, she broke the stale bread into pieces and offered half to the creature. The Ravik ate from her hand as gently as a pet, its massive teeth carefully taking the food without even touching her fingers. They blasted loud alarms into the pit for hours, hoping the noise would drive the Ravik into a frenzy. Grace covered her ears and cried, and the creature pulled her closer, using its own body to muffle the sound. When the alarms finally stopped, Grace talked to the Ravik for hours. She told it about her mother, about the stars she'd seen, about her favorite stories. The creature listened, its head resting near her, those amber eyes never leaving her face. On the third day they flooded the pit with freezing cold water up to Grace's knees. She gasped and shivered, her lips turning blue. The Ravik lifted her onto its back, keeping her above the water, and wrapped its wings around her. Its body heat kept her warm until the Voldren finally drained the pit, frustrated by another failure. Each night, Grace slept curled against the Ravik's warm scales, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. The creature never slept, always watching, always protecting. And each morning Michael watched from above, seeing something that changed everything he thought he knew about monsters. In a cell 3 levels up, Dr. James Blake pressed his face against the bars, watching the video feed from the pit on a guard's unattended monitor. He'd been a xenobiologist before the Voldren captured his research vessel. Now, seeing this impossible bond, understanding dawned on him like a sunrise. "My God," he whispered to himself, tears running down his face. "It's not a weapon. It's a parent." Dr. James Blake hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat hunched over a small data pad in his cell, the dim light making his eyes water as he scrolled through files he wasn't supposed to have. Getting that data pad had cost him 3 weeks of his food rations, traded to a guard who wanted human medical knowledge to treat his sick daughter. Blake had helped the guard's child, and in return he got 30 minutes with a device that could access the prison's old research databases. What he found in those files made his hands shake. The documents went back decades. The Voldren had discovered the Ravik homeworld 40 years ago, a planet covered in massive forests and deep caves. The files showed images of the creatures in their natural habitat, and Blake had to blink several times to make sure he was seeing correctly. These weren't monsters at all. The pictures showed Raviks living in family groups, caring for their young, building elaborate nests. There were recordings of them making complex sounds to each other, almost like they were talking. One video showed a parent Ravik teaching its baby how to fly, catching it gently when it fell. They were intelligent. They were peaceful. They were families. Then Blake found the next set of files and his stomach turned. The Voldren had seen potential in these creatures. Strong bodies, natural armor, powerful jaws. Perfect weapons if you could control them. So they'd conducted experiments. Horrible experiments that Blake couldn't read without feeling sick. They'd captured breeding pairs. Separated parents from their babies within hours of birth. Then came the chemical treatments, injections that rewired the creatures' brains, made them aggressive and violent. When that wasn't enough, they used pain, constant and unbearable, until the Raviks associated everything except killing with suffering. The files called it conditioning. Blake called it torture. The Ravik in the pit with Grace was designated Subject 17. Blake found its history buried in the records. It had been captured with its mate and 2 offspring 12 years ago. The Voldren separated them all, and Subject 17 never saw its family again. The files noted that this particular Ravik had been difficult to condition, because it kept trying to break through the barriers to reach where its young were kept. They'd increased the pain treatments until it finally broke. Or so they thought. Blake read the last entry 3 times to make sure he understood. Subject 17's offspring had died during conditioning. The Ravik's mate had refused to eat and died within a year. Subject 17 had been alone in that pit for 8 years, used as an execution tool, its intelligence and gentleness buried under layers of trauma and pain. Until Grace, a 7-year-old girl singing a lullaby, had done what the Voldren never could. She'd reached past all that suffering and found the parents still buried inside. Grace's innocence, her vulnerability, her need for protection, it had awakened something the Voldren thought they'd destroyed forever. The parental instinct doesn't die. It just waits for a chance to come back. Blake knew he had to share this. He waited until the guard rotation changed, then called softly to the next cell where Captain Michael Hayes was kept. Michael, I need to tell you something about your daughter." Over the next hour, speaking in whispers, Blake told Michael everything he'd learned. The other human prisoners in nearby cells listened too, passing the information down the cell block in quiet voices. By morning, every human on the prison station knew the truth. "Don't you see?" Blake said urgently, gripping the bars between his cell and Michael's. "This is what makes us different. This is what makes us human." The Voldren looked at that creature and saw a weapon they could use. Grace looked at it and saw someone who was scared and alone. Someone who needed kindness. "That's our strength, Michael. We don't see monsters. We see people who are hurting." Michael's eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there now too. "Oh, we have to get them both out of here, James." Grace and the Ravik. We can't leave either of them behind. I know, Blake said. But we need a plan and we need it fast. Because 3 levels up, the Voldrin commander was done with embarrassment. For 5 days, the galaxy had been watching video feeds of a human child befriending his prize weapon. Other worlds were laughing at the Voldrin Empire. Trade partners were asking uncomfortable questions. His superiors were demanding explanations he couldn't give. So he made a decision. If the Ravik wouldn't kill the human child, he would do it himself. Then he'd destroy Subject 17 for its defiance. The commander issued an order to the medical staff: prepare a lethal injection. Strong enough to work on humans. They'd go into the pit tomorrow with weapons and tranquilizers and finish this humiliation once and for all. But the commander made one critical mistake. He announced his plan over the prison-wide communication system, wanting all the prisoners to know what happened to those who made the Voldrin look weak. Within minutes, word spread through every cell block, every work detail, every corner of the station. The humans heard it. They looked at each other and began to prepare. If the Voldrin wanted Grace, they'd have to go through every single one of them. They started gathering anything that could be used as a weapon. They began loosening bars they'd been working on for weeks. They mapped out routes to the pit. But something else was happening too. In the alien cell blocks, prisoners from a dozen different species were listening. There were Keltons, whose own children had been taken by the Voldrin. There were Praxians, whose people had been enslaved for generations. There were Dorians, Telex, even a few Yarwin who normally hated humans. They'd all watched Grace and the Ravik on the video feeds. They'd seen something impossible. A child showing mercy to a creature that could have killed her in seconds. A monster choosing protection over violence. If a 7-year-old human could look at the Voldrin's most feared weapon and see someone worth saving, maybe there was hope for all of them. Maybe they didn't have to die in this place. Maybe they could fight back. The whispers spread. Plans were made. Aliens who'd never spoken to each other before began to work together. And in the center of it all was one simple truth. They weren't going to let the Voldrin kill that little girl. Tomorrow was going to be very different from what the commander expected. The morning of the 6th day started like any other on the prison station. Guards changed shifts. Prisoners received their small breakfast rations. But under the surface, everyone was waiting. The humans had spent the night preparing, and word had spread to every cell block. Today the Voldrin were coming for Grace. At exactly 0800 hours, 12 Voldrin guards marched toward the pit. They carried shock prods, tranquilizer rifles, and a case containing syringes filled with poison. The commander walked with them, determined to end this embarrassment personally. He didn't notice that the prison was quieter than usual. He didn't see the way prisoners watched from their cells with tense bodies and clenched fists. Down in the pit, Grace was braiding pieces of her hair, sitting against the Ravik's warm side like she'd done every morning. She was telling the creature about a dream she'd had, about flying through space together. The Ravik's head was resting near her, listening like it always did, when suddenly it went rigid. Its nostrils flared. A low growl rumbled deep in its chest. "What's wrong?" Grace whispered, placing her hand on its scales. The creature's amber eyes, fixed on the entrance above, could smell them coming. Smell the weapons and the chemicals and the intent to harm. The Ravik rose to its feet, positioning itself between Grace and the entrance, and the sound it made shook dust from the walls. Up in the cell blocks, Captain Michael Hayes heard that roar. It was the signal they'd been waiting for. "Now," he shouted. 3 weeks of secretly working on loosened cell bars paid off in seconds. Michael and 5 other crew members from the New Dawn kicked their bars free simultaneously. Metal clanged against stone as they burst out. Other cells followed. Within 30 seconds, 24 human prisoners were free and running through the corridors. Alarms started blaring immediately. Red emergency lights bathed everything in crimson. But the humans were ready. They'd mapped every camera, every guard station, every weak point. This wasn't a random riot. This was an organized rebellion. Down in the pit, the guards lowered the platform to retrieve Grace. 4 of them descended, weapons ready, while the commander watched from above. The lead guard pointed his tranquilizer rifle at the Ravik. "Back away from the human, Subject 17. Final warning." The Ravik's response was instant and terrifying. It lunged forward with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so large. But this wasn't the mindless aggression the Voldrin had conditioned into it. This was focused, protective. The creature knew exactly what it was doing. It smashed into the containment barrier at the base of the pit, the reinforced metal that had held it for 8 years. What? Twice. On the 3rd impact the barrier cracked. On the 4th it shattered. The guards scattered as the Ravik burst through, Grace clinging to its back, her small hands gripping the spines along its neck. "Dad!" she screamed as the creature exploded up into the main prison level. The Ravik was magnificent and terrifying. It moved like lightning, its claws tearing through metal and stone. Voldrin guards tried to stop it, but they were used to fighting a chained, drugged creature. This Ravik was free and fighting for something it cared about. Guards went flying. Equipment smashed. The creature cleared a path through the chaos with devastating power. But here's what made Michael's heart soar as he fought his way toward his daughter. The Ravik never once hurt a human prisoner. When people ran past it, the creature carefully avoided them. When a guard threw a human prisoner into its path hoping to slow it down, the Ravik gently nudged the man aside. It seemed to understand completely. These were Grace's people. Her family. They needed help, not harm. "Grace!" Michael shouted over the noise of alarms and fighting. "Dad!" She saw him and the Ravik immediately changed direction, barreling toward Captain Hayes. When they reached him, Michael looked up at his daughter riding this massive creature like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he couldn't help but laugh even with tears running down his face. Dr. Blake appeared at Michael's side, breathing hard from running. "The hangar. The New Dawn is still docked in Bay 7. We have to move now before they seal the doors." They ran together, the Ravik leading the way with Grace on its back pointing directions. "That way. Left at the next corridor," she called out, and the creature followed her guidance without hesitation, trusting her completely. But something even more incredible was happening in the lower levels. There were other Raviks in this prison, kept in separate pits, isolated from each other for years. When Subject 17 roared its defiance, they heard it. They heard one of their own fighting not because of drugs or pain, but because it chose to. Because it had something to protect. One by one, the other Raviks began smashing through their own containment barriers. The Voldrin had bred the ability to communicate out of them, or so they thought. But some instincts run deeper than conditioning. The sound of one Ravik fighting for freedom called to something ancient in the others. 5 more Raviks burst into the main corridors. But they weren't killing mindlessly like they'd been trained. They were fighting with purpose, breaking through walls to reach alien prisoners who'd been kind to them, who'd whispered to them in the dark. A Kelton prisoner who'd always sung softly near the pits found himself protected by a Ravik as guards attacked. A Praxian who'd dropped food into the pits at night watched in awe as a Ravik cleared the path to safety. The prison descended into complete chaos. Prisoners of a dozen species were escaping. Raviks were fighting alongside them instead of attacking them. And at the center of it all was a 7-year-old human girl on the back of a creature that had chosen love over violence. Grace held on tight as her Ravik crashed through another group of guards. She wasn't scared anymore. She knew this creature would never let anything hurt her. And somewhere deep inside, the Ravik knew that this small, brave child had given it back something the Voldrin had tried to destroy. It had given it back its heart. The hangar bay doors loomed ahead, massive and sealed tight. Captain Michael Hayes and his group of escaped prisoners skidded to a stop, breathing hard. Behind them they could hear more Voldrin guards coming. Ahead was their only way out and it was locked down. Then Grace's Ravik charged forward and slammed its full weight into the door. "What? Twice?" The metal groaned and buckled. On the third hit, the locking mechanism shattered and the doors burst open. Inside the hangar was chaos. Voldrin guards were trying to form defensive lines, but they weren't prepared for what hit them. 6 Raviks came through those doors fighting not because chemicals forced them to, but because they wanted to. Because somewhere in the last hour, these creatures had remembered what it felt like to choose. The battle was fierce but didn't last long. Guards scattered. Equipment crashed. Within 10 minutes, the hangar belonged to the prisoners. The New Dawn sat in docking Bay 7, exactly where the Voldrin had left it. The colony ship wasn't military, just a transport vessel for families heading to the outer territories, but right now it looked like the most beautiful thing Michael had ever seen. "Everyone aboard," he shouted. "Move, move, move." Freed prisoners ran up the boarding ramp. Humans, Keltons, Praxians, dozens of species all flooding into the ship together. But when Michael turned to follow, he saw Grace still sitting on her Ravik's back and she was crying. "Gracie, come on, we have to go." "Not without him, Daddy." Her small voice was firm despite the tears. "He saved me. We can't just leave him here alone again." Michael looked at his 7-year-old daughter, then at the massive creature she was sitting on. The Ravik's amber eyes met his, and in that moment, Michael saw something he never expected. Intelligence, understanding, and hope. This wasn't a mindless weapon. This was someone who'd saved his daughter's life. He looked at his crew gathered at the ship's entrance. His first officer, Lieutenant Danny Cole, nodded. The chief engineer, a woman named Patricia Ross, smiled. They understood. All Ravix come with us, Michael announced, his voice carrying across the hangar. We're not leaving anyone behind. The 6 Ravix looked at each other, making soft sounds Michael had never heard before. Then one by one they approached the new dawn. The cargo bay was large, built for equipment and supplies, but fitting 6 creatures each the size of a small shuttle was going to be tight. Captain? Dr. Blake was at a console, his fingers flying over Voldrin controls. I'm in their database. There are more Ravix on this station. Breeding facilities on levels 12 and 15. They're keeping the young ones there. Captain, some of them are just babies. Michael felt something harden in his chest. He thought about Grace, about what the Voldrin had been willing to do to a child. He thought about these Ravix, families torn apart and tortured until they forgot how to be anything but weapons. How many? At least 20 more. Maybe 30. Then we save them all. His crew stared at him. Danny spoke up carefully. Captain, the Voldrin will be regrouping. We might have 20 minutes before they seal all the levels and trap us here. Then we'd better move fast. Michael turned to the freed prisoners. Anyone who can fight, grab weapons. Anyone who can't, get on the ship and prepare to leave fast. We've got more people to rescue. What happened next would be talked about across the galaxy for years. The escaped prisoners, led by humans and protected by freed Ravix, stormed through the prison station. They hit level 12 first, blasting open doors to find rows of containment cells. Inside were young Ravix, some no bigger than large dogs, all alone in the dark. Grace slid off her Ravix back and ran to the nearest cell. It's okay, she called softly through the bars. We're here to help. You're going home. The young Ravix inside made a small, scared sound. Then Grace's Ravix stepped forward and made a deeper call. The baby responded immediately, pressing against the bars. Dr. Blake got the cell open, and what happened next made several grown men cry. The adult Ravix bent down and gently touched noses with the baby. The young one made happy chirping sounds and pressed against the adult's side. All through the facility this scene repeated. Parents finding offspring. Siblings reuniting. Families coming back together after years of forced separation. The sounds echoing through those corridors weren't roars of rage. They were cries of joy, of recognition, of love that had survived torture and time. Guards who tried to stop the rescue found themselves facing not just humans with weapons, but Ravix protecting their rediscovered young with a fierceness that came from the heart instead of chemicals. Level 15 had more breeding facilities. They freed them all. By the time they made it back to the hangar, they had 28 more Ravix of all ages, from babies to elders who'd been prisoners for decades. The new dawn was packed beyond capacity. The cargo bay was full of Ravix. The passenger compartments were stuffed with freed prisoners. They also commandeered 3 Voldrin transport ships, loading them with refugees and Ravix who were finally going home. The Voldrin commander tried one last time to stop them. He sealed the hangar bay exit and sent his remaining forces. But Grace's Ravix, with the little girl still on its back, led a charge that broke through their lines. The hangar doors opened to space and the ships launched. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving the prison station behind, Michael stood on the bridge watching the stars stretch into lines. He could hear celebration throughout the ship. Below deck, Grace was in the cargo bay with her Ravix, whom she'd named Thunder after the sound he'd made when they first met. Captain, his communications officer called out. Sir, there are videos spreading across the networks. Someone was transmitting from the prison. The whole galaxy just watched what happened. Michael pulled up the feeds on his screen. There was Grace sitting in the pit singing. There was Thunder protecting her. There was the battle, the rescue, everything. And underneath, millions of comments were pouring in. The Voldrin had tried to suppress it, but you can't stop the truth once it starts spreading. Dr. Blake joined Michael on the bridge, looking exhausted but happy. We're going to have to rethink humanity's place out here, Michael said quietly. We can't win through strength alone. We're too small, too new to these stars. We don't need to, Blake replied, watching Grace and Thunder on the monitor screen. The little girl had fallen asleep against her friend's side, and the Ravix was watching over her with bright, clear eyes. A 7-year-old girl just taught us something the rest of the galaxy forgot. Compassion is stronger than any weapon. We don't conquer. We don't dominate. We befriend. Even those everyone else has given up on. Thunder made a soft rumbling sound, a sound of contentment and peace. Grace smiled in her sleep, dreaming of flying through stars with her best friend. The Voldran Empire would issue statements calling this a minor setback. They'd claim the humans had used tricks and deception. But the truth was already spreading to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their stubborn, beautiful refusal to see monsters where they could see family instead. And in that crowded cargo bay, surrounded by creatures the galaxy had feared, Grace Hayes slept peacefully. Because she'd learned something important. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be kind when everyone else chooses cruelty. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is love when everyone else chooses fear. The New Dawn flew on toward home, carrying humans and Ravix together, proving that family isn't about what you look like or where you come from. It's about who chooses to protect you, and who you choose to protect in return.